Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Trust and Believe. I'm your host, Shaun T. And today, I have to let you guys know that I'm super excited to talk about a subject that most people would probably want to cringe over. Now, I'm excited to talk about this for two reasons. One, because I've done all the self work to deal with my sexual trauma and childhood abuse. But number two, our guest that we have today is one of the most incredible people to talk about sexual trauma and sexual abuse because while this may make you a little bit uncomfortable, he does it through comedy. And I think it's really amazing. And I think beyond that, we are going to deep dive into the world of sexual abuse and sexual trauma. Not only how to get through it, how to get out of it, how to deal with it, but just being real about it. So get ready to trust and believe.
Somebody say hell yeah!
What's up?
He's better than Oprah.
Come on, y'all. This is Shaun T, and it's time to trust and believe.
All right, everybody. I'm here with my guest today. His name is Sebastian Scales. I have to tell a quick story. First of all, I was scrolling through TikTok, during the pandemic, minding my business, and I saw this smile come across the screen. No, while Sebastian has a really great smile, I started listening to his story, and it was so similar to my story. And I know a lot of you out there know my story, and it just became so real that I actually was having flashbacks to my own story. And not only was I having flashbacks to my story, there were parts of Sebastian's story that I said to myself, wow, I wonder if I had that strength to do that. And then I had a battle with, well, I didn't have the strength, and that's okay. And I came up with all these questions and answers and whatever. And I said, you know what? I just want to talk to this guy because he has a great way of articulating his experience. And I think he's going to help a lot of you today. Sebastian, what's up?
What is going on, Shaun? Thank you for that lovely intro, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, man, I'm just so excited to have you here today. And I'm just going to jump right in. I would love for you to tell your story, and I might interrupt you a little bit, but when you're done, I have some really interesting questions to go along with that. So tell us your story.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. The feelings are just so mutual. And
Thank you.
yeah, so when I was 8, I started getting molested by my best friend's dad. And he originally introduced it as a game, which was called the Wiggle Game. And I know you're familiar with the game introductions. And basically, he would come into the room when I would sleep over at my friend's house and wake me up by wiggling my dick. And I at the time, all I needed to know was that it was a game for that to be like enough for me to be like, oh, okay, like, I guess I'm down. Like, I don't really know what's going on here, but it's a game, so I guess it's okay. That was the
Mm,
extent of my thinking as a kid. And when you don't say no the first time, it feels like every time after that is more difficult because like you already had the opportunity once, and now it feels like you kind of allowed this to happen. And now I remember thinking to myself, if I speak up, people are going to be like, well, why didn't you say something immediately? And then the longer it went on for, the harder it became to speak up because I thought that people would think that I liked it. And it's just one of those classic child abuse survivor guilts that we carry with us later in life, where you assume all of these reactions that people are going to have to you talking about your trauma. And we also create these scenarios in our heads as kids for how people will perceive us and what's going to happen. So that Wiggle Game eventually progressed more and more into, basically, he would come into the room at night and just hold my dick.
mm.
He wouldn't jerk me off. He never had the courtesy to make me come, and it was a little bit. It was just so confusing, and I remember at the time thinking to myself, like, I would get so frustrated with my dick because I was like, I don't like this. Why are you hard? Like, and it was such a
Mm.
confusing thing because I knew that I wasn't attracted to this guy. But according to my dick, it was like, well, I guess I am, and I guess I'm gay. I mean, that was the conclusion that I made at that time. And obviously, when we're thrown into these sexual experiences way earlier than we should be, your mind starts sort of filling in the gaps and trying to rationalize the situation and make it make sense when it's impossible to make sense of. So, even though I kind of knew that it wasn't right, there were still things that made me continue to go over there because I didn't know what would happen if I spoke up, but I knew that I would probably lose my best friend.
Mhm.
And that was kind of enough at that point in my life to be like, I love my friend and I don't want to lose him. So that was kind of the price that I was willing to pay, at least for a couple of years. And, it went on until I was 10. And part of the reason why I didn't say something was because I thought that my dad, like if I spoke up, that my dad would try to fight the guy who molested me. And I thought that my dad would lose. So in your head, like these are the things that we come up with and reasons why we can't speak up. And so when I did eventually tell, I told my mom and I made her promise not to tell my dad, and of course she had to. That's part of the thing, and we had to go to they called the police, and I literally thought that like if the police were called, that they would confront the guy who molested me, and they'd be like, "Did you touch this kid?" And I thought he'd be like, "Yeah," but like he had boners, so like it's cool, right? And I thought the police would be like, "Yeah, well, no worries then." And I thought, I thought that the erections like were justification for the whole thing, and it basically like made me my sort of gut feelings irrelevant, and that made it harder to speak up. What I think a lot of child abuse survivors find, and trauma in general, is that when you do start speaking up, all of the reactions that you thought were going to happen generally are not true. You certainly will get some people that don't believe you, but for the most part, everything that I thought was going to happen did not happen, including losing my best friend. We actually still managed to be friends, and I'll get into that. But after I told my parents what happened, they called the cops. The cops confronted the guy. He went to jail for a day. He had to post bail, and then we went to court a couple of months after that. And that was a huge trip because I had to testify in front of like this jury and the judge and just random members of the public who were there because it was just like open to people, which was crazy. And the guy who molested me. In our judicial system, you have the right to confront your accuser in court, even if that accuser is 10.
That
So,
that accuser who was confused because he's like, "What the hell is going on?" So yeah.
yeah, like I just couldn't believe the scenario. And it was like, I didn't realize that that was going to be part of the experience. But yeah, I had to basically talk about it. It was like a 9-hour deposition. And yeah, they got all, I had the prosecuting attorney who basically had me tell the story, and then the defense attorney whose entire job is to poke holes in your story. So I remember him asking me like how long it went on for, like for each time. And it generally would go on for like minutes. I mean, when you're going through it, time sort of warps and you sort of, at least for me, I like played possum and like blacked out a little bit and tried to make this seem like it was as short a time as possible. But I remember being embarrassed by how long I actually knew it had gone on for. And in the same way that I didn't want people to know that I had boners, I also didn't want them to think that I was just letting this go on. So I basically was like, yeah, it went on for like 10 seconds, 20 seconds. And then he would basically be like, but do you remember the last time you talked about this? You said that it was 15 seconds. And like, we're literally getting into like the second differences in each
Wow.
molestation instance. And, it's a crazy thing to expect a child to recount trauma in this way, in this scenario, and to expect like graphic details to come back when our brains are trying to protect us from these things, and we don't want to remember any of this stuff, especially at the time. So it was a wild experience. And the guy did not get convicted, which is pretty standard for child molestation cases. You know, most of the time there's no like quote unquote like tangible evidence. It's just a kid being like, "This guy touched me," and the guy's like, "No, I didn't," which is not really enough to convict somebody in our judicial system. So he was basically just like let off. And my
Mm.
parents asked me if I wanted to move away because they knew that he would just be around town. And I was like, no, like all my friends are here. I love it here. And I didn't want to do that. So we did get a restraining order against him. But a condition on the restraining order was that he was still allowed to go to his son's soccer games. And his son and I went to the same high school. So, and we played on the same high school soccer team. So for every high school soccer game, the guy who molested me was in the stands, which was bananas. And crazy too to think like, the people that wrote that restraining order were like, all right, he can't be around you at all, except for 1 hour a week. He gets to watch you exercise. Like, what a concept, like as if I'm going to see him anywhere else.
But at any point during that time, were you angry?
I was really angry in the time like between when I was 11 and when I got to high school because I wasn't able to hang out with my friend at all. And I always blamed the guy who molested me for like ruining our friendship. And that's why when we actually got to high school and we're on the same soccer team, it was so cool because we had these forced interactions, me and my friend, but he was always cool to me. Like we had like a cordial relationship and we would like party together. And that was really relieving for me because I knew that that meant that he believed me.
Mm.
Um, if he didn't believe me, if he thought I was making it up, he would have hated me. And just he didn't have to say I believed you for me to know that he thought that I was telling the truth. So I had a lot of anger in that interim time frame, and it actually manifested in these wild ways. Like, especially when I was getting molested, I had some anger too, and I would get these crazy back spasms. And I would be like screaming in the car, like on the way to school and on like road trips and family road trips and things. And literally, like the moment I spoke up, those all went away. And I remember telling my mom, and in that moment, just feeling a lot of these pent up emotions of anger and fear and worry, all sort of like being lifted and processed just by not being the only one who knows about it. And feeling like, okay, like this isn't going to happen anymore. Like I'm safe. That
Yeah.
made all the difference.
If something like that happened in my town, one, everyone would know about the court case of my best friend's dad trying to molest me, or not trying to molest me, my best friend's dad molesting me. And it would just kind of be weird for him everywhere he went. And where was that odd moment for him, I would say?
It was a small town, so like everyone knew that this had happened. And the vast majority of people were on my side and, were very much like they all believed me. But there were some parents who didn't believe me and would hang out with him and his family at games. They'd still let their kids go over there. And I think that's actually, I have this tendency of people pleasing that I've been sort of deconstructing after starting to do stand up about my molestation and stuff. And I think it stemmed in part from being in these situations where I was around these families and people on the island and seeing these people who were on the guy who molested me, like his side. It felt like there was a war going on between my family and their family. And I felt like I needed to get as many people onto my side as possible. And if I didn't, that like my family would lose the war. And so that created this weird dynamic where I felt like I was hyper nice to people,
Mm.
um, to the point where it was like a defense mechanism. And yeah, even though the majority of people believed me, it still felt like it was basically just like a big you from whoever would sit next to him at games, like, hey, we don't believe you either, you know?
He got off. He really did this to me. Those who believe you really hold no weight. It's the people who don't. So you almost have to fall victim to this. You are a victim, and then you fall victim to the justice system letting you down, and now you fall victim to society letting you down. And so it's almost like, well, because they find me to be unbelievable, unreliable, think that I'm lying, like, what do I have left to prove my side? Like, I spent 10 hours in a deposition. So, like, maybe I can be nice and maybe these people will believe that, like, this really nice person is actually telling the truth. Like, that's what I'm thinking about when I hear that, because I'm just like,
Yeah, man, it's crazy. And that was one of the things that was it was so hard to deal with the fact that he didn't get convicted because I was like, you know, why would I want people to think that this happened? Like what? Because if I'm making this up, there must be some sort of rationale. And there's nothing that my best friend's dad could do to me that would make me say that he touched my dick other than him touching my dick. What's he gonna take away
this,
my Xbox? Like,
right.
there's nothing that he could do.
Well,
But
it's interesting you say that too, because I was watching the show Pose. And so one of the actors, one of the scenes was this guy going back to his hometown after 20 years. And it was this like really church going town, and everybody's like, and so his mom, he was molested in this story. He was molested. He told his mom. She didn't believe him. She still stayed married to the guy. And so that on top of him being gay, he's like, wait a minute. She's like, she says something like, I think you're maybe being gay for attention. And he's like, so do you think that I like going to school and having people call me faggot and beat me down? So like, I'm choosing this for attention. That's
yeah,
the thing that's just like so bizarre. It's if I wanted attention, I would like go throw eggs at a stop sign at the corner so people and stay like not say that my best friend's dad was playing with my penis. Like this doesn't make sense.
it doesn't add up. That's exactly it, man. And it's funny because after I started doing stand up about it, I put out a recording, and I eventually found out that one of my friends, I became friends with this person in high school, so I didn't know them at the time, but their dad was actually on the jury of my trial. So I sent him the recording, and I was like, hey, here's what's going on in my life right now. Like, I would love to talk with you about what this experience was like for you, because what better material than the people who thought that I was lying? Like, what are you guys thinking, And so I hit him up, and we went and got coffee, and he told me all about the experience and basically how it wasn't that people didn't believe me. It was that they didn't want my friend and his sister to grow up without a father. And I'm like, so you guys thought that he was a pedophile, but thought that it would be better for his children to live with a pedophile than not have a pedophilic father. So it was pretty crazy. But that conversation ended up being really cool because he told me that he had been molested, and he
Mm.
was 65 and had never told anybody about it before. And it was just sort of in the flow of conversation where, when you start talking about these things openly in a way that, people can feel that you don't have shame associated with it, it makes it a lot easier for them to share their stories too. And so he was saying, like, yeah, I was certainly not going to tell anybody about this. And I was asking him, like, how hard that must have been to be on the jury for that, and how triggering that probably was. And he was like, yeah, it was terrible. But for him to excuse himself from that, he would have to say that it happened to him, and he didn't want to do that.
You had just like the maturity and level-headedness and clear-headedness to actually want to talk to him without wanting to walk in and like sock him. And and just to sit there and listen and understand, because at that point, you know you understand in a really odd way.
For sure. And I should clarify, he said that the guy was guilty. He voted that he was guilty. Um, it was 6 of the other jury members. So he explained, the whole dynamics that were going on and how it was basically people being like, "This is so clear what happened," and other people being like, "Yeah, but we don't wanna break the family up." So fortunately, he was on my side. It would have been certainly tough if he was like, "Yeah, I didn't believe you either," but
The most persuasive side will, in a way, that determines what the verdict is. And it's so crazy.
it honestly makes a lot of sense that these child molestation cases don't generally get convictions because our jury system is not set up in a way to convict these people. Once I got to high school and really realized that my friends still believed me, that took a lot of the weight off too. And it was also cool because, like my obviously everyone knew that this guy was at the games, and so the parents that believed me would form like this parental wall in front of him, and they would stand in front of him at soccer games to try to like block his vision. And at the time I was like pretty embarrassed by that because I was like, can we just not make a big deal about this? Like, everybody chill, I really want to pretend like this didn't happen. But in retrospect, I think that really did give me a sense of security, and like it was really cool to see like, hey, like we've got your back.
I hear you speak about this, and while it's comedic, I also find it to be classy in such a different way to talk about it because everyone probably expects you to act a certain way because this happened to you. How did you bridge the way between high school, playing soccer in front of your molester, then having to grow up and deal with number one, sexuality, because I want to kind of get into that, and
Yeah.
then and just the therapy part of it to make your way to where you are now, which I think is has been therapy for me, like a very funny way to talk about molestation. I mean, it's so great. I want to get to the funny way a little bit later, but how
Yeah.
did you bridge that? All of those little things, work through all of those hurdles to get you where you are today.
With the sexuality aspect, I hadn't had sexual experiences other than this guy molesting me. So my whole basis for what happened sexually was just this 50-year-old man touching my dick and me getting a boner. So like I said, that was I concluded that I was gay. And I remember I had a girlfriend freshman year of high school, and I remember we dated for about a year, and I remember her giving me my first hand job, and I was like, "Oh, this feels good no matter who does it." And I was like, "Whoa, wow, what a monumental
Sebastian,
hand job."
Sebastian, you just you make you make me
It was crazy, man. And she just thought I was having a really good time, which I was, but I was also like, "Oh my god, I'm straight. Like, what a
yeah,
trip." Or
yeah,
at the very least, not just gay. So it was honestly that it sounds silly, but that hand job actually provided a lot of clarity because,
yeah.
again, the molestation never progressed past hand jobs. So in my head, it was like, okay, well, I have something to compare that experience to, and it's somebody that I'm actually attracted to, who's providing the same physical feelings that I was getting from this guy. So it allowed me to sort of step back and not be so conclusive about like, okay, apparently I'm gay, but like I'm not attracted to dudes. Like I don't understand what's happening.
Mhm.
So yeah, shout out to my first girlfriend.
Yeah,
But
homegirl helped you out. She gave you that good euphoric feeling.
yeah, totally. Basically, like after I went to trial, between when I went to trial and when I started doing stand up, I didn't want to talk about this like at all. I didn't want to talk about it during the trial either, but like, obviously had to. So and part of that is because of how people normally present the information and how people respond to it. Normally, when you tell somebody that you got molested, they're like, "Oh my god, like I am so sorry. Like I don't see how things could be any worse for you." And it's like, "Well, now they're pretty bad. Like just a second ago, like, well, I didn't mean to tell you this to get this pity party." And it's not like they're doing that maliciously. It's just the standard reaction. And what I've found is like that makes it so much harder to talk about because again, we're talking about like the guilt that we take on as survivors, where we don't want to make anybody else feel bad about what happened to us. So if you know that people are going to start cringing and feeling weird about you talking about this, it doesn't make you want to speak up. So that was sort of what originally drew me to stand up, was like, I would see these people talking about, Pete Davidson talking about his dad dying, or, people talking about the worst things in life in a way that makes you laugh. And it was sort of one of those things where it was just a feeling that I just kind of followed. The first set that I ever actually did was about molestation. I was living in Manhattan at the time. I graduated college and then was living there. And something about it, I think it's one of those things where, like, as much as we try to bury these things, they just come out eventually, like you were saying. And I didn't know what was gonna happen, but I wrote a set and got on stage and pretty much blacked out, just like the molestation. But I remember it going pretty well, and I finished the set, and it was like telling my mom all over again. It was this
Mm.
euphoric, cathartic release of suppressed emotion that even though I talked about it in trial and stuff, I didn't really process it at all. I was still suppressing it. So it was this crazy release. And I remember getting out of the comedy club and just like running around New York, just like sprinting, and like it was super maniacal. Like I was crying and laughing and like I
Oh.
threw up, and like it was just this bananas feeling that really got me addicted to stand up, one, but also like this new way of processing emotion. Because stand up is like effectively like therapy. It's basically just having a conversation. It's a one-way conversation. I mean, obviously people laugh, but you can say whatever you want. And so stand up very quickly became therapy for me. And fortunately that first time went well, because if it hadn't, I don't know what would have happened. But I mean, after that, I bombed for like 4 months straight. And
Mm.
it was because, I didn't know. One, I wasn't okay yet. I was still like in the processing stage of these things. And I felt like I needed to be something other than what I was to make this funny. So I would be like really gruesome, and I'd talk about molestation in general rather than like my personal experiences. And I wasn't using truth, I was just using fabrication. And what I learned over that 4-month time period was like, you don't have to be anything other than who you are to like make this work and to be accepted. And I started going into like, what was I actually thinking at the time? What really happened? And the more I leaned into truth, the more laughs I would get and the better it would feel for me, because I wasn't like presenting this person who I think need to be on stage in order to be accepted. I was like, here's who I am, and like here's what happened. And it's such a rejuvenating and alleviating feeling to know that you don't have to change, like and in fact you will be more accepted just by being yourself. And the people that don't accept you are the people that you don't want to be around anyway, so they're doing you a favor.
For those who are listening to this, I just have my hands up. I'm like, I'm looking at Sebastian as he's God. I'm like, praise him. Yes, I agree with everything you're saying.
Thank you, man. So it was like, getting into the truth of things, and that really changed my comedy. And it made it like, I started talking about having boners, and I started talking about how confusing it was. And it became a lot more therapeutic. Just and then it was like, okay, like I can actually like do this. And the
Mm.
more truthful I was, the more people would tell me after shows. Like, because basically, whenever I do this material now, somebody will come up to me after the show and be like, hey, I got molested too. Sometimes people have never told anyone about it. And it's not just molestation. Like, I had a guy come up to me after a show and he was like, hey, man, both of my parents killed themselves when I was 8 and then 12. And he said it with like a big smile on his face and was just like ready to laugh about it. And I was like, wow, dude, I don't know your name yet, but it's so nice to meet you. It was just like this absolute trip where I was healing myself and also at the same time having these experiences with other people that were a new level of healing, which is like setting other people free and yourself at the same time. And it really became very purposeful. And as I was getting better at comedy, more and more people would continue to come up to me and tell me these things. And so that was where I got the idea for this podcast, which I was lucky enough to just have you as a guest on.
And everyone has to listen to that episode. You have to go to Sebastian's podcast and listen to it. But we'll talk about that later. We'll tell them how to get there. But keep
Totally.
going. Sorry.
No problem. Yeah. So, it became this thing where these conversations that I was having with people after shows were like, I realized that this would be really beneficial for more people to see. And I didn't want these conversations to just be limited to the 14 people that were at the show or like whoever happens to come up to me after. So I started recording these podcast episodes, and it's called What Happened to You, and it's all things trauma. And I really quickly realized that people are wanting a new way to approach trauma. And it's not just molestation, it's everything. We want to be able to talk about these things in a way that makes us and the people that we're talking to feel okay. And humor is not for everybody, but the people that resonate with it like heavily with it. And it provides this outlet that is hard to find oftentimes. And so that was sort of, I started that in 2019 and been doing those conversations and stand up ever since. And it's really been like the most purposeful thing that I've felt and experienced. And I eventually got to the point where I had a set that I was comfortable enough putting out onto the internet. And so I put it out, and, immediately people from college were hitting me up. People from high school were hitting me up, saying all of these things that had happened to them. And a lot, again, a lot of these people are like, hey, I've never told anyone about this before. And so literally just by seeing somebody else talking about it in this way, it made other people feel like they could do the same. And so I pretty quickly realized like, okay, this, I need to get this out to as many people as possible. And that's where TikTok came in. And, I had no idea what I was doing on TikTok. And eventually I just kind of like figured, why not? Like I had made some various different videos, but like, let's give it a shot and see what happens. And so I made a video, of me doing one of the bits that's in that recording, but just me talking to it like in a TikTok format. And, it went pretty viral. And within a day, I mean, I have thousands of messages from people being like, hey, this happened to me too. All of the same things that were happening after shows were now scaling, and around the world, people are hitting me up. And the thing about child abuse and trauma is that like, it doesn't discriminate, everyone's affected of all the different possible breakdowns. Everyone experiences these things. And so it was so cool to see like a global impact that one 40-second video on TikTok made in a day.
Mm-hmm.
And, very quickly it became kind of overwhelming, because I was like, all right, well, all of these people, not all of them, but a lot of them were not just telling me, but they were like, I want to do your podcast. And which was amazing. Like, that's exactly what I wanted to happen. But very quickly I realized like, okay, I don't know how to like prioritize this. Like, okay, this guy got molested for 3 months, but this chick got molested for 2 years, and it was by her grandfather or whatever, like I didn't want to be like prioritizing trauma, and nor did I want to be like the gatekeeper of all these people looking for an outlet. So during that time that the TikTok was going viral, actually, this girl, Stephanie, reached out and she was like, hey, let me know if you need any like assistant scheduling work, that type of thing. And I was like, oh my God, I really do. Like, for the first time ever, like, thank you. So she set up my schedule, and basically I was like, all right, just open it up. Whoever wants to do it can do it. Block off Saturdays. We'll do 2 interviews a day max, and just open it up, first come, first serve. And so she put it out. And within a day, the next 2 months, every single day, there were interviews. And I was like ecstatic, because that was the goal, But very quickly I realized like a lot of these people are literally talking about this for the first time. And it's a very different experience to talk to somebody who's done a lot of processing compared to somebody who's very new to it. And it's not knocking everybody. We're all at different stages. But it very quickly became like Zoom therapy. and
I was gonna
I'm
say,
not
you become a
qualified.
therapist and you're like, "Wait a minute."
Yeah, exactly. So, people would be breaking down on these episodes, and I'd be like trying to make jokes like an asshole, like trying to keep it light, and it just wasn't working. So I sent messages out to everybody, and I was like, look, I need to figure out a different way to do this because this isn't sustainable for me. And obviously everybody understood. So now there's like an application process, or I'll reach out to people directly, and I try to have people on that make listeners feel like um optimistic and upbeat talking about it. And, generally, if you have comedians or people that can laugh about it, that's really the goal of the show, is normalizing conversations about trauma using humor. So that's pretty much what it's been since then. And, I've been putting content out on TikTok and YouTube, Instagram, all the spots. And I'm just trying to have as many people see these things as possible, and really just to allow as many people to talk about these things as possible.
Well, I wanna say that I think what's so interesting is, so the way you shared your story was through comedy, and people reached out and they're like, "I wanna tell my story." And the way I told my story on TikTok was through storytelling via text, and I got more, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened to you." And I think that both of those things, create thought process, and both of those things in a way get people to kind of perk up and think about their lives or think about something, because like I said, I think I told you on your show, there's a gentleman that I know that saw my story and ended up telling his wife that he had forgotten that that happened to him,
Mhm.
because of the way he looks up to me. And for you, but most people on me are like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry." Whereas for you, people may have said, "Oh my gosh, I'm sorry that happened to you," but they're like, "Oh, like if you can tell it like that, that's a really great way to kind of get past it." People would come to your show looking for therapy or a shoulder to lean and cry on. But the flip side of that, and the way that you do it, is it also allows people to like almost do it in a freedom of expression. And in a way, I know I'm saying a lot here, I think what's also really cool about the way that you do it is it immediately shows what can happen when you allow yourself to know that it happened to you, when you allow yourself to accept that it happened to you, because it's really the ultimate compliment to yourself when you can be like, "This happened to me and I can talk about it, and I can talk about it in any way, because I'm either doing the work or I've done the work to try and feel through that."
Oftentimes humor is like the foundation of the conversation, but it's really just the gateway to deeper conversations. And to say, like, once you're laughing about something, it's a lot easier to go into it. There's a quote from Wayne Dyer which says, "It's impossible to laugh and be afraid at the same time." So, these conversations, while there are funny moments, a lot of the time they get a lot more serious and deep. But I find that once you're laughing about it, it allows this level of acceptance, like you're talking about, that's like, it's very disarming. And you kind of know that, like, no matter what comes up, you're going to be okay. And it really is, you're absolutely right, man. Like, it's acceptance, and being able to know that, like, you are doing yourself a favor by allowing yourself to feel the feelings that are suppressed, and it'll allow you to grow. And you don't have to go do stand up to do this. Like I said, stand up is just a conversation. But whoever you're talking to, and even if that's just talking with yourself, these conversations are so essential for healing, especially if you've never had it before. For anybody listening or watching, like, feel free to. It's just the absolute best feeling. And you might run into people that don't believe you, and you just need to keep speaking up until you find the people that do. Because in the same way that with stand up, like when I was presenting this version of myself that I thought I needed to present in order to be accepted, it's just you're attracting people that don't even know you, that aren't attracted to the real you. So the quicker you can sort of step into that authenticity, the quicker you can, surround yourself by people that are going to elevate you. And, we take this weight off of ourselves. We have this tendency to mask. And this is what I mean about the people pleasing. Like, I just find myself doing it all the time, even still. And just sort of recognizing like, hey, I know why I'm doing this and I'm safe. And in fact, people pleasing is having the opposite effect most of the time. Like
Mm.
you could kind of feel it when somebody's doing that to you and it doesn't feel real. And what people really want is real because if you're being yourself, you allow other people to be themselves too. So, yeah, man, it's
And
just sort of leaning into the truth.
and with that said, Sebastian, I always ask my guests to define trust and believe. And I think what's really special about your story and what's special about you is that you've talked a lot about acceptance and being a people pleaser and combating those two. So, how would you help people really trust and believe in who they are?
Everything that you think you need and everything that you're striving for externally in terms of validation or feelings, it's all available to you internally. There's nothing that you need from anyone else to feel okay. And a lot of people ask me about like how I feel about the guy who molested me. And I'm at this point now where I don't feel any negative emotion towards him at all. And, it took many years of talking about these things and doing stand up, but the forgiveness is for yourself more than the person that you're forgiving. Because when you harbor these emotions, when you harbor anger or whatever it is, it might be about somebody else, but those feelings are originating in you. You're storing them in your body. And I would say just sort of trust yourself to be able to heal from whatever you've been through and believe that it is possible. It's not something, no matter what you've been through, you can get to a point where you are okay. And you actually get to a point where you're excited to have new memories come back because it allows you to understand yourself at an even greater level than you did before. Instead of it being this thing where you're like really afraid to have these experiences and memories come back up, it's like, oh yeah, that happened and I'm okay now. And yeah, I would just say that like, you know, no matter how long you've been feeling a certain way, no matter how long you've believed yourself to be this person or this way, or to think of yourself as a victim, you can change that. And it's something that I would encourage anybody who is feeling down about these experiences or is harboring any emotion to just allow yourself to feel it and let it go.
I now know why I like your smile so much. It's less about the physical smile and more about the fact that you are really working to smile on the inside and it comes out. So, Sebastian, thank you so much for spending some time with me. I know there's a lot of people out there who may not have thought about dealing with their past traumas in a way that allows them to feel a little bit more euphoric or free. And I think you just opened up uh, a good Pandora's box for people by way of expressing and believing in their emotions. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Sean. You create a fantastic environment that makes it very easy to share these things, and I really feel grateful to be on here. So thank you for having me.